How not to get lost, mapping new user experiences. What I'd like to talk to you about is how at Google, as part of the user research team, we've been working with Google Maps to make sure our product is more focused, and actually the entire company is more focused on the needs of the next billion users. But first, introductions. You were meant to meet Jeannie Fulsham here. She's a great researcher who leads the international team at Google. I'm not her, clearly. Unfortunately, couldn't be here, and the reason is this. It's the view from the Dublin office early this morning. It was beautiful, but also very foggy, and the fog meant that there was no train connection between London and Dublin, so she couldn't make it. And so I'm going to talk about the work that she's been leading. So there's a lot of field research she's been doing in India to get Google Maps up to speed for the needs of our users there. Who am I? I, as you just heard, am leading user research for Google globally for Maps, Identity, and Search, so some of our core consumer products. I've been with Google for about 9 years, so when I joined, I was in the mobile team. That was before iPhone existed, there was no Android. And then Google kept me entertained. I worked on maps, I worked on flights, I worked on travel and commerce, so saw a lot of different parts of the company. More recently, I've been building up a couple of new teams. They have more of a vertical or thematic focus, and one of those new teams is the team that Jeannie is leading, which is focused on international users and their needs. So, who are we designing for? Let's get started. It's very common and very natural for us when we think as designers about user needs, about ourselves first and the people that surround us. And there's nothing bad about this, right? So there's a natural empathy to what we do. And many of our engineers and our product managers and designers, they're in places like you see here on the left side, San Francisco, but also in Dublin and London and elsewhere. So we often go outside, we talk to people in the street, we invite them in to observe them, to see how they use our products, to get inspiration. That's all good, but if you really want to design for global users, 80% of people do not live in environments like this, so we have to go much broader. That's why we started focusing a dedicated team on research in places such as Brazil or in India that you can see here. Why does this matter? Well, when I started at Google about 9 years ago, there were 1% of the global population had a smartphone. Now we're closer to the 40% mark. But if you look at projections by the ITU, you can see that there will be billions of people coming online by 2020, and all these people will be using smartphones, and their experience of being online will be very different from the experience that we have maybe here in Dublin. So of course, access, or enabling all these people to have connectivity wherever they are, is hugely important for many tech companies. So there's a number of efforts underway to provide this connectivity. The photo you see here is from Project Loon. Google is launching balloons to give access to the internet in remote territories. Facebook is doing something similar with drones. And we also have a project underway called Link that provides fiber broadband access in Africa. Now, more interestingly for us as designers, what is the experience today for users in those places? And what are the design constraints that we have to take into account as we are designing? First of all, there's connectivity. It's patchy and it's pricey. So when we do our user research, when we go to India, what we find very often is that many people are on 2G, simply because any other connectivity speeds are too expensive, or also because they're not reliable enough. So many users may not even perceive a difference between 2G and 3G. And many just decide not to have any connectivity other than Wi-Fi hotspots, which are free or cheaper. So people go from these patches of connectivity rather than assuming connectivity throughout. So that's a big constraint that we have to design for. There's also the cost of being connected. One extreme example is Eritrea, where the cost of a broadband internet connection is about 50 average annual salaries. So if you think about it, it's like an entire lifetime of work for 1 year of broadband. That puts a very different set of design priorities on what we're designing for. Then also looking at the devices, they are very different from what you may have come used to, right? So they have very small screens, often 4 inches only. They have very limited memory, and they're often the lower or mid-tier. So every single pixel that we design really matters so much more, and we have to be very careful how we use the available screen real estate. I spoke a lot about the technical constraints, but really what our job is as user researchers is understanding the human side as well, the human factors, and there are many issues or factors we have to consider. First of all, if you design for India, there's not enough content available in many of the local languages. So many users who are not experts at speaking English, they will still try to do a search in English. And we see many queries on Google Search or also on Google Maps that are poorly phrased and they may use too many words. And we have to design and build around those constraints. Similarly, literacy might be an issue, so typing a query or search might not even be an option, so we have to think about other modes such as voice. And then simplicity is always a very big factor for design, but it becomes so much more important to be simple and constrained and make everything as learnable as possible. So I've given you a lot of facts, and it's partially our job as members of the design team focused on research to get these facts together. But ultimately, if we want to achieve momentum within the company, we really have to do this collaboratively with our engineering, with our product management partners. And so that's why we organize many immersion trips. We take the entire product team to India. Here you see a photo of two colleagues, the gentleman in blue and the guy with the backpack. So these are members of our product teams. These are the engineers who are building Google Maps, and we took them out to a train station to spend a day at a train station talking to passengers. And it's experiences like this that really build the empathy and that then drive the change and the momentum within the company. And as was said before at the panel, we really are jointly product creators, so we do these immersion trips and then have design sprints and product brainstorms afterwards. So with all this effort, with all this research, immersion trips, desk research, logs analysis, surveys, what do we do? What are the projects that we've kicked off based on these insights? First, we are partnering with India Rail to give access to rail users in 100 railway stations across India in 2016, and that way we will reach 10 million daily travelers who will then be able to at least have decent connectivity at the stations where they pass through. Another big project is offline maps. If you're using Google Maps, you might be familiar with the offline functionality. You can download map area, so you have it accessible when you're out of range and have no connectivity. We're now working on a new version that will be much more powerful. You will then be able to do turn-by-turn navigation if you are not connected, and you can also do searches within the area you saved when you're not connected. And we believe this will make a big difference in India in particular because of all the constraints that I mentioned before. And another mode in which we are experimenting in this space is by building new small apps just from the ground up. So we just launched a transit app only built for Delhi. It's really small. It has none of the standard Google branding or standard Google design. It's minimized. It's about 1 megabyte, and it has all the transit schedules for metro and bus, I believe, in Delhi, available offline. So again, there's no connectivity needed, but you get value out of it if it's on your phone. When you do have access, let's say at a train station with Wi-Fi, you can then get the latest updates, and you can also get notifications for when you're delayed. So the first feedback is pretty positive, and we plan to learn from experiments like these and then build bigger products from that. So I spoke a lot about the things that we are doing on site, let's say in India, but also equally in other emerging markets such as Brazil. I want to emphasize, though, that there's a lot of more scrappy things that we can do and that we are in fact doing that are independent of big investments. So in particular, if you're in a startup and you may not have like a global spread like Google does in terms of people on the ground in these places, there's still a lot that you can do. And here's a couple of things that we are doing regularly back home. So first of all, we mimic to some extent the constraints that users experience in these locations. So one example we have in our offices, we have standard Wi-Fi, but we also have what we call an impaired network, so we can experience like Apache 2G connectivity. So our colleagues can test on their phones, and here's a speed test as an example, how this product would work realistically outside on a poor 2G connection. If you don't have this, you can also get extensions or Chrome developer tools that allow you to constrain and throttle the experience to get a more real, direct insight for what it means to use these devices. And then We also have device libraries, so any designer can grab a locally typical device and can see how their design looks then on, let's say, a 4-inch screen phone that's very common in India. And then finally, we do a lot of user testing, often very scrappy, very simple. We just get a couple of people in, show them some early designs, let them interact with them or with prototypes. And you can do this very easily remotely as well, even using Hangouts or some other screen sharing tool. You can do that quite easily from wherever you're based and then get local user feedback. And with that, I'd like to thank you and happy to chat with you later.